Good morning and welcome to the Student Hub Live. My name's Karen Foley. I'm a lecturer in Learning and Teaching Innovation here at the Open University. And in today's programme, we're going to be talking all things essay writing. So welcome to everybody who's watching from home. Welcome to new people who haven't come along to these events before. I'm very quickly going to explain how it all works. So we're live streaming from our studio here at the Open University in Milton Keynes, and I've invited a range of guests to come and talk about various aspects of essay writing. And I'm hoping that this will not only provide you with some brilliant information that you can take away as you start writing your assignments, but also you'll get to know some of the academic members of staff at the Open University and have the opportunity to talk to other students at home. Now, these are live interactive events, which means that you can ask questions to my guests and we'll put those to them in the studio. So if there's something that you'd like to know, you can tell us what that is in the chat. Now, HJ is manning the chat and I'm going to go and say hello and see how everyone is at home. And he's going to also give you some helpful reminders about how the interface works and some techniques that you can use if it's moving too quickly or too slowly for you. HJ, how's everyone at home?
We're doing very well. So many people came so early in the morning, unlike me. I was probably still in bed by the time some people got on here, but it's great to see everyone chatting away. I think the main thing to know with the chat is that anything goes, so any thoughts, comments or questions for our guests, want to hear it, or if, like Susanna and Kirsty, you've popped off to get a cup of tea, you want to know about that as well. As I'm still undecided whether I'm going to go with tea as Susanna and Kirsty or coffee as Rennie this morning. But yeah, with the chat, you may find it goes a little bit faster if we got a lot of people in, which we have this morning. So on the top right, there's a pin button, which means you can manually scroll down like I do. And if there is anything in particular you want to ask our guests, just put in the chat. And if you need any help, there's a little help tab as well. And I'm happy to help there as well. I've also got my fancy board behind me. So if there's anything that I think is a really good study tip, I like study tips, or anything else I really like, I can stick it up on our board and then we can see it and keep ourselves as a reminder for the rest of the day. And we've also got our widgets starting to pop up as well. So it's nice to know where everyone is and how everyone is feeling as well. But yes, we're all excited and ready to go, I think, in the chat.
Perfect, HJ. Now, these widgets or interactive voting tools are things that you can fill in for us, and they give us an idea about what you're studying, at what level you're studying, where you are, and how you're feeling today and how you're feeling about your study. Now, all that you do with those is select on the one that you'd like to tell us about and then click on the thing that applies to you. So if that's the map, it'll be where you are. If it's how you're feeling, there's 3 blank spaces. Now, you need to put 3 things in there, otherwise the results won't submit. But if you can only think of 1 or 2, that's absolutely fine. Just put a full stop in and then your results will submit. Now, when you do that, you can also see what everyone else at home thinks as well. So it's a great thing to do. And also, as HJ says, do put things in the chat. Let us know what you're studying, how you're feeling, how you're doing, and also any questions that you've got. And a bit later on, because if tea and coffee is a thing, which we've been debating here this morning as well, I think we're on a coffee streak, we've got a little video coming up after my first guest about critical thinking that shows you how to discuss the claim that tea is better than coffee. So look forward to that later. We've got a packed programme. Today we're going to cover critical evaluation first, then we're going to talk about compare and contrast, killer conclusions, introductions and critical thinking, describing and referencing. Now, that might seem like a bit of a strange order to you, but what we've tried to do is deconstruct various aspects of the essay. And you might meet this idea of what we call process words in your assignments. So it might be things like to what extent, or describe, or evaluate the claim. And you'll meet some of these words in your assignment and they all mean quite different things. So what we've decided to do at the Student Hub Live today is to focus on how one might approach questions like that and to give you some techniques that you can use to think about dissecting the information and representing it in your own words to be able to effectively address the question. So that is our plan today and all will become clear. You can drop in and out throughout the day. Do make yourself tea and coffee as we're going through. And if you miss something, or indeed you'd like to watch it again, the catch-up will be available very shortly afterwards. And if there's a question that you don't want to mention in the chat but you would like some feedback on, you can email us, which is studenthub@open.ac.uk. Right, enough of all of that. We'll go through some more bits and bobs as we're working through. Fill in the widgets, say hello to everybody, and welcome my first guest, Paul-Francois Tremlett.
Hi, Karen.
Good morning, how are you?
Good morning, very good. Had my coffee, I'm almost awake.
Good. So, Paul, you come to talk about critical thinking with us today.
Critical thinking, critically evaluating, when you see an essay question that begins with critically evaluate da 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 da, you know, you might be intimidated. So the point of today's session or this morning's session is to, as it were, demystify what those words mean and try and get you into some good habits for addressing questions with terms like that, and also to remember that when you're writing an essay, all those terms on the board behind HJ, evaluate, contrast, compare, all that stuff, they're all connected to each other. They're part of a sort of collection of terms that are there to help you build a good essay, build an essay that addresses a question in a constructive and interesting way.
Now, Paul is from religious studies, and
I
I
am.
imagine you have a lot of questions like this. Now, Paul, I've looked up what critical thinking means off of Wikipedia, and it says critical thinking is thinking about thinking. It's a way of deciding if a claim is true, false, or sometimes true and sometimes false, or partly true and partly false.
Helpful.
Yes, it's very helpful. This is why you shouldn't use Wikipedia, incidentally, all the time, and rely on your module materials. So I have got some questions, and I wonder if at home you can tell us some of the things that you think are critical thinking. And then we'll ask Paul to say whether they are true or false, or sometimes true and sometimes false, or partly true and partly false. So tell HJ in the chat what you think critical thinking is. And I've got a couple of starters here. We've also got some widgets that you can vote on and tell us, well, fill in actually as well. So what you think critical thinking means, and those are multi-choice questions, so you choose the one that applies to you. So Paul, we've got some cards for you. These are some of the things that people have said to me about critical thinking. I never get critical evaluation. You want my opinion, but then you tell me off when I give it to you. So is that true, false, partly true or partly false about critical thinking?
Well, I'm sorry, Karen, but I actually think that we've started with false.
Okay.
And the reason for that is I don't think critical thinking is really about your opinion. Now, if we think about thinking about thinking, that sounds a bit sort of abstract, but actually we do critical thinking all the time. It's an everyday skill we use. A previous guest of yours talking about this talked about critical thinking in terms of doing something a lot of us have done in the past, like buy an appliance like a fridge. You need to know the measurements of your kitchen, the space where it'll go, the kind of capacity you need for your foodstuffs, the family, and how your family consumes food, and the kind of fridge and freezer that you need. So you're thinking critically about a problem. You're evaluating the different evidence that you're faced, cost, size, appropriateness, and then you're reaching a solution by buying the appliance that works for you. That is critical thinking. In the academic context, you're doing the same kinds of things. You're looking at evidence, analysing it, and doing so in a way that's unbiased. And that is not necessarily giving your opinion.
Okay.
Because if I just wanted opinion, yeah, I'd be asking a different question.
Okay. All right. HJ, have we got questions? Otherwise, I've got another one.
Well, we're deciding whether or not we need single or twin pack of biscuits. I'm not sure that quite comes into critical thinking. We just know whatever packs we have, they go too quickly. So we're still working out the critical thinking in the chat, I think.
Well, another one, Paul, is critical thinking is finding everything negative about something and raising all of those points. Everything
negative. Yeah, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do false again. I am. One of the easy mistakes, I think, is to assume that because we're using the word critical, we mean criticism. Actually, it's a bit more complicated than that. It's about trying to weigh up evidence, see flaws in evidence, the way it's been presented or the way the evidence has been gathered, and maybe look at counter evidence, counter examples, weigh those up and reach a balanced conclusion on the basis of that process. And that, you know, that's not about finding the flaws, or there may be an element of finding flaws, but that's not the key process that you're engaged in. What you're engaged in is a nuanced appreciation of an argument, of an evidence base. And the point is that you're not going to come to a conclusion, this is right, this is wrong, this is true, this is false. You're much more likely to come to a conclusion where complexity, nuance. These are the kinds of issues that you're going to embrace, as it were, at the end of your essay. So there may be flaw. Yeah, you are looking for flaws, but that's not, or you will encounter flaws, but that's not your primary.
Yeah.
That's not your primary motive.
Okay. Well, we're going to have an example in a minute. Right, one other thing, and I would like you to vote on this at home. So you've got one of the widgets or tools that says, is it true, false, sometimes true and sometimes false, or partly true and partly false? Most students find critical evaluation the hardest of any form of essay. So let us know what you think. Do you agree with that at home? Do you think that is true, that critical evaluation is one of the hardest types of essay that you might meet? Or do you think it's false, or sometimes maybe, sometimes not? So let us know what you think at home. HJ, how's everyone doing?
So I think we're getting to grips more with critical thinking, and we're putting the biscuits aside, but Tasneem reckons critical thinking is about evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of an argument and considering a possible counter view as part of that as well.
Oh, Paul, which one's that then?
I like that one. I think I'm going to give that a
true. Oh, very good. Excellent.
We've got Callum as well, is thinking about discerning the truth in a text or in the way the text is received and the themes people draw from it as well.
I like that. But I am going to go, that's only sometimes true and sometimes not.
Good. Why? We have to justify all points here, Paul.
Because obviously the reception of text is a bit of a thing in religious studies for obvious reasons, and how texts are received, how texts are interpreted, doesn't necessarily have to do with an objective truth. It has to do with how communities read and how communities think and engage with text, but it's not necessarily a question of truth, and that's why that's my hesitation, as it were, with that particular take.
This is an excellent point, though, because I think so often we see these lovely module materials and we think, oh, that must be the truth because someone's written that and they've got a theory, they've published it, etc. And so we can often forget that actually everything is driven from some place.
Yeah, I think sometimes people want to know what distinguishes scientific activity from other kinds of inquiry. And I think the most important thing to remember is that science is actually making tentative claims to truth, although they're not always presented in that way. All claims, all theories coming from the broad understanding of what sciences mean would be tentative, because they're always being offered and always have the potential to be challenged, falsified, to use the truth-false type language, but challenged, reappraised in the light of new evidence. That means it's always tentative. So everything we do in the sciences, and I mean the human and social sciences and the physical sciences, is always about developing tentative hypotheses, theories about trying to interpret the world around us. It's not so much about true and false.
Great.
I think Davin's come up with one as well. Critical thinking is when you validate all evidence fairly and make a decision on the evidence.
Wow, decisions. That sounds like a policy approach. And so, because I'm scared of policy decisions, I'm going to say, I mean, just to be controversial, look at Brexit. Partly true and partly false. Coming to big policy decisions on a big thing from the 90s on was evidence-based policy. Well, sometimes evidence is presented or let's say cherry-picked to suit certain agendas, and we have to be very aware of those kinds of processes. So critical thinking or critical evaluation isn't just something we're doing when we're buying appliances or when we're writing our essays. It's also looking at the world around us and thinking about how evidence has been put before us as publics, in the big decisions of the day, if you like.
And we asked everyone at home, HJ, as well, whether they think critical evaluation is one of the most difficult things. What did they say?
Well, we're all on our first assignment, so we're not too sure whether we think it's difficult or not. Some people are halfway through the ones that have the critical thinking questions, and it's just trying to work out how much opinion that they can put in that as well. What do they think based on the evidence, and is it critical to use own opinion as well? So we're not quite sure, but we're still working through it.
Okay, so let's have an example, Paul, because I think it's all well and
Yes.
good coming up with some of this, but it doesn't feel quite real. So, have you got us an essay question that
I
we can
have.
look at and work through? Good.
I
And
have.
what is your question?
The question is religion, it's an RS question, is religion disappearing from modern societies? And I thought that would be something we might all have an opinion on.
Yeah.
Whether we've all got evidence for that opinion is another matter.
Now, how long might this essay be? Because this is one of the first things we might look at is the length of such a discussion.
Well, 1,500, anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500 words.
Okay. So, broadly speaking, how many sort of points or things might you be able to put into an essay of that length?
Well, your standard essay, introduction, conclusion, but then probably 5 maybe points or significant paragraphs through which, each paragraph dedicated to a particular issue, and then hopefully in a nice logical order so that the essay has a good flow.
Yeah. Now, I've asked you to bring some props in so we can think about 5 or 6 of these things, and then what we're going to do is try and evaluate some of that evidence to answer this question.
Indeed.
Okay, so what is your first thing that you've brought in?
Okay, so first things first, this is a map, and if we're going to answer a question about is religion disappearing from modern societies, the first thing we need to do is decide which societies, where are we looking?
Okay.
Right, so
Good.
the majority of studies of this question have been done in the UK, Western Europe and North America, but there have also been studies in other countries such as Japan, and unsurprisingly, the conclusions differ depending where the studies have been conducted.
Now, our question is religion disappearing from modern societies?
Yes.
So are you talking about the basis of which the study is done or the object of where the study is done?
I don't understand your question now. What I mean by modern societies is societies that are no longer traditionally based. They're organised in sort of in terms of modern nation states,
Okay.
and they're broadly secular.
So it's where
in
the
terms of
societies
economy
are,
and
not in
politics.
which country they're doing the research. There's not a difference with where they're doing the research.
No, this is the sort of as it were the structure of the
Okay.
of each.
Okay, so it's important to know where the countries are and who's included and who's not.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, so we've got our map. Good. We'll put that in front here. Right. What is the next point?
Well, here is a Bible. We need to know which religions we're talking about.
Okay.
Okay, so, and that's a difficult question, right? Because in Japan, we might be looking at Buddhism.
Yeah.
In Britain, we might be looking at Christianity, but then there are all kinds of other questions. So which Buddhism are we looking at in Japan? Yeah. And in Britain, would we be doing looking at the Church of England or the Methodists or evangelicals? So there's all sorts of issues of religious diversity, not just among different traditions, but also within traditions. We often think about religions like Christianity and Islam as quite monolithic. They're not at all. They're extremely diverse internally. So which religious populations are we interested in?
And also, because whilst some of those are very, clear-cut religions, there are lots of new religions emerging. I mean, we've had religions at Student Hub Live about biscuits and things, and Jediism as well.
Yeah,
so
sorry
again,
about that.
So part of this is about setting your parameters and saying, okay, if we're going to talk about religion, what do we mean by religion? So you're having to define your terms and decide what actually counts.
Absolutely, and just to be clear, the majority of studies that have been conducted on the UK are about the Church of England.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Brilliant.
we have good data on
Okay,
that.
so we've got our Bible. This is another paragraph.
Yes.
Right. What else?
Now, the next object is a watch.
Okay.
And if we're thinking about secularization, if we're thinking about religious decline, we're implicitly involved in thinking about time, hence the watch. Now, if we think religion is declining today, does that mean before there was a lot of it? Was there a golden age of faith? Now, I'd be really interested to hear any student responses to that question. Do we think there was more religion in the past and there's less now, they might be surprised at there might be some surprises at what the data says.
Yeah. Well, let's see, HJ, how's everyone at home?
Well, Jane came in straight away with that. She reckons if a society is broadly secular, then religion has already mostly disappeared. But I know there's still on critical thinking as well. So Tasneem has a great point. Would it be useful to think of critical thinking as evaluating? Sometimes thinking of it with a more familiar word can make it easier to understand what the question is asking. So can we use evaluation and critical thinking in the same way, or?
Yeah, I mean, often the question will be critically evaluate. So, I mean, that's exactly the right way to think about it. So we can say, where is it? True.
Yes.
And I know Shahida said as well that maybe there's more religions now than previously as well. But it depends on how you define religion, doesn't it?
So what I like about that remark is it completely contradicts a previous student's remark saying if societies have become secular, then religion must be in decline by definition. Well, I'm kind of more with Shahida that you can have lots of religion actually going on in secular societies. It's just maybe we just need to think about what religion and secular mean in these new contexts.
And this is interesting because whilst it's, tangential evidence, we're all picking at the same sorts of things but arguing something very differently. And I guess this is the interesting thing about critical evaluation is that there's no right way to do it. You can arrive at a completely different end result by interpreting the information in different ways. And it's all about how you frame the question, which is why it's so important.
Absolutely. There's a very famous sociologist called Brian Wilson. He was one of the first proponents of the idea of secularisation and religious decline. He looked at Church of England attendance figures, saw this decline taking place in the UK, but he also did work in the States. Now, he didn't see decline there, he saw something else. But he still argued that was also evidence for secularisation, even though the figures didn't show decline. And so he clearly wanted his cake and to eat it with his argument.
Brilliant. Okay.
Should we do some more objects?
More points, yeah.
So my next object is a brain.
Okay.
And the reason I've chosen a brain is because we need to be clear about what we're trying to observe. Now, when people talk about religion, they often think about religious beliefs. Beliefs aren't necessarily externally observable or externally available for analysis because they're held in here, right? So what evidence are we after? Are we after what's in there, or are we thinking about buildings or ritual occasions, or what are we looking at basically, and how are we measuring it?
Okay, so
I've
put the brain
anticipated
down.
already.
And the last one, because I want to see how you're going to bring all this together, Paul, which is the most interesting thing. Tape measure in there with you.
And
there
lots
we are.
of interesting plastic slides of brain.
Very handy.
Whenever you need them.
Exactly, if you need a coaster, they're there.
So the final thing is, as Karen said, a tape measure, because, we're measuring, right?
Yeah.
But what are we measuring? Are we measuring beliefs? Are we measuring incidents of public ritual, numbers of religious buildings? What is it that we're actually interested in? And how can we be sure that our measure is reliable and dependable? Can we assume that just going around asking people, do you believe in God, is actually going to deliver viable information that we can actually use in a constructive way?
Okay, so we've got all these things here, and they're all good points, right? And we've talked about the importance of our parameters. So in our 1,500 word essay or so, how do we sort of start combining these, Paul? And do they all have the same weight? Now, I've got some chocolate stars for you to give these a star rating, because one of the things I think is that some of these might be more important than others. So which is the most important point, and how might we then start to combine some of these together? Because the order does matter in terms of how you shape an argument, but as we've said before, you can do this in so many different ways, so it depends on your particular stance. How would you go about ordering and approaching these?
So the first thing is we've left the balloon behind.
Oh yeah, where's the balloon? It's gone.
It's gone, it's floated away.
The atheism balloon.
So we'll just have to carry on regardless.
Okay.
But I think the first thing I'd like to do in my essay is just establish where the research has been conducted and which religion. So, I mean, those are the first, and actually because of the first things, because they're like getting things set, they're setting it up, they're kind of important. But I think the most important thing for me is the watch.
Right.
Because at the centre of an idea of religious decline is an idea of time.
Yeah.
Now, it's very common to talk about progress.
Yeah.
Progress in the economy, progress in politics, progress in personal development, progress through one's education, right, and achievement. And that's how we think of often how religious decline has been framed. In order for societies to progress, new ways of, or rational secular ways of thinking need to become dominant, and religious ways of thinking need to give way. That was a very powerful argument back in the day. And it was the idea that time is progressive and that religious decline would accompany rational progress. However, it's a kind of just so story, right? That's the just so story of liberal democracy. And as we can all see in the world around us, the just so stories of liberal democracy are much more fragile than perhaps anybody thought. So I think
this is a lot more important than the other points.
Well, I'd want to set up my thing with them, but we need time. We need to understand how important that idea of time is to the attractiveness of secularisation, to the attractiveness of the story of religious decline to lots of different audiences.
Okay, so in a sense what you're doing is you're almost setting up something, so a thread that's going to run through the whole of the argument, and you're using one piece of evidence as almost a bigger piece to pin the other ones onto. Is that what you're doing here?
Yeah, and I that's right, that track, all the others hang off it.
Which is a very clever use of evidence.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so you're then going to build up. So how might this argument then shape? Can you give us like a narrative way to end the session and think about how you would then sort of try to bring these together using your framework of time?
Well, I'd still want to give some chocolate stars to how things are measured is absolutely central.
Yeah.
Let's say we're measuring, like the sociologists of the 60s and 70s, Church of England attendance figures. We're also interested in survey data because we want to know what's going on in people's heads, also very important. So, however, when we look at the evidence we've got for religious decline, yes, it's quite compelling for the Church of England.
Yeah.
But when we start moving to other religious populations, let's say evangelicals or even religion that's taking place outside regular religious institutions, paganism, for example, or new religious movements, as you mentioned before, then we start to find there's actually a huge religious scape or religious activity going on essentially beyond the gaze of the sociologist who's doing this kind of work. So I think the answer that you're going to arrive at is, while religious decline may be happening in some religious populations, particularly in, long-standingly institutionalised religious populations, however, there's lots of religious activity going on in new spaces, mega churches, for example, as I indicated, pagans and new religions, and that's where there's lots of new religious activity. However, that's not always getting picked up in the surveys and the statistics, or at least not. It certainly wasn't being picked up in the 60s and 70s.
So it's important to look at what's there, but when you've been thinking about it, you've also been noticing the things that aren't there.
Exactly.
And that's one of the things as well. So whilst we've got the evidence, it's about putting it together. And equally, I really like this idea that it's not all equal, because so often we think, well, 5 things, let's carve out our essay into 5 equal proportions. But actually, you've shown how some things can have more weight, more star ratings than other things, and they'll have more of a clout, basically, in how you frame this whole argument. So that's been really interesting, Paul. Thank you very much.
Lovely.
I think we've got that sort of I hope everyone has learned something at home. And thank you, Paul, for coming along and talking us through that. Right, as I promised, we now have a video to show you, which is about critical thinking, and this is about a different approach, again, looking at the whether tea or coffee is better. HJ, is everyone okay back at home?
We're all okay. We're having a great discussion about religion, whether, you know, we're on the topic of it declining, looking at different Christian sects, whether it's getting broader or narrower. And I would end on Suzanne's comment to saying, if an MP can only guarantee a seat in the House of Commons by attending morning prayers, does the society meet the criteria of a secular society? I think that's a great thought to finish up on.
Perfect. Well, you're going to have to stop all that in a minute because Fiona Doulahan is coming on from creative writing to talk about compare and contrast next. But you can keep talking about religious studies, and I know Paul will be very happy if you do.
I'd be delighted.
But we're going to have a short break, and you'll join us for the next session, which is all about comparing and contrasting in about 5 minutes. See you soon.